In one of the shorter chapters of the book of Adam and Eve, consisting of merely 5 sentences, we are shown the immediate reaction of Adam and Eve to their new home outside the Garden of Eden, that being the rest of the earth. As you might imagine, this was a dark and dismal place, a barren land that stretched out as far as the eye could see, with very little encouraging prospects. Indeed, this was a cursed land after all. God had quite literally made it so that Adam would have a hard time getting anything to grow as a result of his betrayal. Yet there was more to it than that. This new home had no warmth, no comfort, no beautiful trees to admire, and no magical pools of water for which to bathe in. Chapter 2 of this text presents a deeply emotional and tragic view of Adam and Eve's transition from a state of divine grace to one of suffering and mortality. The magnitude of their actions begins to weigh on them in this part of the story, and the consequences that they must now endure for the rest of their mortal lives begins to sink in. The text begins, "When our father Adam and Eve went out of the garden, they walked the ground on their feet, not knowing they were walking." One of the most striking differences between the two accounts is how they portray Adam and Eve's emotional response to this exile. In Genesis, the transition from the Garden of Eden to the outside world is described briefly. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim, and a flaming sword which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life. You might say that the preemptive measures in the form of the cherubim became the focus of Adam and Eve's departure from the garden, not the attitude nor mindset of these first humans. The employment of such a foreboding guardian, who wields a flaming sword, frames this passage in the canonical Bible as a reminder of our original sin. It makes readers ever more aware that they aren't allowed back into paradise, and if they even so much as tried, they would have to deal with an entity that had the likes of Ezekiel down on his face quivering. Whilst the biblical passage is succinct, as it focuses on God's action, it does imply a sense of loss, but it does not delve deeply into the more personal reaction of those who were kicked out. In contrast, chapter 2 of the book of Adam and Eve emphasizes their shock, fear, and confusion upon stepping outside. They walk on the earth not knowing they were walking, which suggests a dazed, almost dreamlike state of distress. When they see the vast, rocky earth, they are so terrified that they fall to the ground as dead. The text shows us the stark contrast between their former paradise, a place of beauty, comfort, and divine presence, with the harsh reality of their new existence. The text specifies that they walked the ground on their feet, and you might be wondering, well, how else would they walk? Such is the level of discomfort that Adam and Eve were now experiencing. For where they had likely become accustomed to the softness of the grass, now they were forced to endure the harshness of the hard earth. Such wording could very well be taken as literal, but in a more metaphorical sense, it shows us that Adam and Eve did not transition well. This was more than just expulsion. This was pain, torment, and sheer hardship. This was only the very first moments of them contemplating their new home, and already their feet hurt because of it. Worse yet, they didn't know where they were going. God had left them no instruction, no advice, nothing but the brunt of his cold shoulder. In the past, I've seen the notion of Adam and Eve being kicked out of the Garden of Eden as being symbolic of a baby being forced out of the womb. Like Adam and Eve, the baby has no idea of the world it is entering. It only knows the comfort and safety of the womb. This is not unlike Adam and Eve, who knew of only the comfort and safety of the garden. Yet the two share the same fate, thrust out into the chaos of a vast yet cruel world, with no sense of what they were meant to do here, nor how to even survive. Despite being fully grown adults, it's hard not to look at Adam and Eve as infants. They have been scolded by their parent, They are purposeless in their novelty, and they are inexperienced with the very fabric of the world in which they now inhabit. Why, at this stage, they aren't even aware that they need water to survive, as told to us in later chapters. They can't comprehend the reality that they are not immortal anymore. They have enjoyed the luxury of paradise, and because they have known nothing but, they are now fundamentally ill-equipped to survive even a single day, let alone the rest of their mortal existence. Such a dramatic depiction in the Book of Adam and Eve reflects an important theological theme that's sometimes overlooked in the traditional Genesis account: the transition from divine grace to human suffering. In that sense, this text suggests that man originally possessed a more exalted or higher state, perhaps something akin to an angel in his own right. It would explain why God had made man in his image, as told to us in the Genesis account, and that perhaps Adam had been made with a certain godliness of his own. Yet it also goes to show just how far man has fallen in his meagre human state, toiling on the ground, fighting over scraps, living a finite existence that's devoid of divine luxury. With this, the text presents the fall not just as an act of punishment, but as a deeply traumatizing experience, emphasizing humanity's vulnerability in a world without God's protection and without the protection of the garden, arguably man's natural habitat. The text continues, "And when they came to the opening of the gate of the garden, and saw the broad earth spread before them, covered with stones large and small, and with sand, they feared and trembled, and fell on their faces from the fear that came over them, and they were as dead." A key theological element introduced in the Book of Adam and Eve is the idea that Adam and Eve originally possessed a bright nature. As mentioned, there is a suggestion here that before the fall, Adam and Eve were not simply human, but existed in a more exalted, almost angelic state, which may be indicative by how disturbed and mortified they now were to find themselves outside of the garden. It wasn't just a change of scenery then, it might very well have been a change of human nature. The passage states, "When they were in the garden, they were filled with the grace of a bright nature, and they had not hearts turned toward earthly things." This concept is absent in Genesis. In the biblical account, Adam and Eve are created as physical beings from the very beginning, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. While Genesis does indicate that sin brought mortality, "For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return," it does not suggest that Adam and Eve lost a divine, luminous nature. The apocryphal account, however, presents their fall as a degradation from a spiritual state to an earthly one, making their suffering even more profound. As if this shock of seeing an early earth needed to be exemplified anymore, the text tells us that for Adam and Eve, fear came over both of them. They fell on their faces and were so overcome by their new reality that it was as if they were dead. The title of the chapter indicates that they were both so overwhelmed that they fainted, but it's entirely reasonable that they did feel dead when in comparison to their former glorious state. Another significant difference is how God responds to their suffering. In Genesis, God provides for Adam and Eve by making coats of skins, showing a degree of mercy. I compared this in the last episode to the tired parent providing their wayward child with a final act of compassion. However, God's main role in this story is as a judge who enforces consequences. In contrast, the Book of Adam and Eve portrays God in a more compassionate and directly intervening role. The text states, "God had pity on them, and when he saw them fallen before the gate of the garden, he sent his word to our father Adam and Eve, and raised them from their fallen state." Here, the Word of God is introduced as an active force in comforting Adam and Eve. In Christian theology, the Word is often associated with Christ, as in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This inclusion of the Word in this narrative suggests a proto-Christian interpretation, where God's mercy extends beyond judgment and punishment to direct intervention and grace. This is a crucial departure from Genesis, which does not mention the Word as a separate, compassionate agent. Instead, the book of Adam and Eve presents a more intimate and relational aspect of God's character, hinting at not only future redemption, but also perhaps reconciliation. It's true that God was furious with Adam and Eve. Why else would he have banished them from the garden? Yet despite this, he can't quite keep himself away from them, as we see in subsequent chapters of the book of Adam and Eve. In some sense, this is not the bitter and distant God of Genesis, who essentially leaves Adam and Eve to fend for themselves, but perhaps rather the doting parent, who continues to look out for his children regardless of how much they have hurt him. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then do leave this video a like and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.